Among countless books on wisdom, Krishnamurti's Life Ahead stands apart. It doesn't promise success, teach skills, or comfort the suffering. Instead, it acts like a mirror held up to life, reflecting how humanity unconsciously repeats itself. The book doesn't instruct but dismantles. It doesn't bestow faith but dispels illusion. Each page of Life Ahead is a dialogue between teacher and student, between the known and the as yet unnamed. The seemingly innocent questions of the children become gentle blades, slicing through the layers of artificial wisdom. Here, every concept of morality, religion, education, or success is turned on its head, revealing the rawest essence of what it means to live. Krishnamurti didn't advise people to be better, for he understood that every effort to improve stems from fear. He didn't tell us to seek peace, because the seeker himself is the root of unrest. Instead of teaching us how to live correctly, he simply asked if we ever truly live unburdened by memory, desire, or self-image. Life Ahead isn't a message exclusively for the young, though on the surface, it's written as conversations within a school. Every question the students posed about freedom, love, fear, and meaning is a question people of all ages have whispered in their own darkness. Reading this book isn't easy because it offers no sanctuary. It's not a light that comforts, but a light that shines through, exposing the shadows we avoid. And perhaps that's why it is so profound. What makes Life Ahead different is how it compels the reader to confront the simplest thing, the breath of the present moment. We are often taught to prepare for the future, to build ourselves up, to become someone. But Krishnamurti asked, if we are always preparing for the future, will we ever truly live in the present? If each day is merely a stepping stone for tomorrow, are we living, or just practicing for a life that never arrives? The book creates a space for introspection, not through intellect, but through stillness. It speaks of the intelligence of the heart, a wisdom that cannot be learned or taught, but can only arise when the soul is no longer afraid. And perhaps, upon turning the final pages, the reader will realize that freedom isn't found externally, nor at the end of a journey. It lies in the moment we pause to see ourselves, not through concepts, not through names, but simply to see asterisk. So, can human beings live unbound by the past? Can they love without wanting to possess? Can they learn without fearing mistakes? And if the answer lies in how we are listening right now, are we quiet enough to hear it? In those days, I often watched the students enter the classroom, carrying two things simultaneously, their satchels and their fear. I wondered what compelled a child, just entering life, to bear the heavy inheritance of fear. They were taught that going to school was to become someone, to be recognized, to not be left behind. But education, in truth, had stolen the most crucial thing, the ability to ask why one exists. I asked a boy in the front row, "Why do you study math?" He replied, "To pass the exam." "Why do you need to pass the exam?" "To get a job." "And after you get a job?" He fell silent. That empty gaze was the genesis of all tragedy. We learn not to understand, but to cope. We learn out of fear of failure, fear of comparison, fear of being deemed useless. Every score becomes a scar on innocence. I saw children begin to lie to themselves, pretending to understand, pretending to be smart, just to be praised as good. Adults, parents, and teachers were no better. They feared their children would fall behind, so they pushed them into a never-ending race. They, too, feared losing their status, losing respect, losing the measure of power society called success. This fear spread like an invisible doctrine, passed from one generation to the next. When people are afraid, they lose the ability to see. They only perceive safe paths, conforming, obeying, blindly believing. Fear turns the mind into another's shadow. We no longer dare to think, no longer dare to love, no longer dare to step out of the wall built by comparison. I remember a girl asking me, "Teacher, how do I stop being afraid?" I didn't answer immediately. I looked into her bright, trembling eyes and said, "You don't need to learn how to stop being afraid. You only need to look directly at fear. We want to escape, to cure, to extinguish it. But those very actions nurture it. Fear thrives because we don't dare to confront it." One afternoon, I walked past the playground. Children were throwing balls, laughing loudly. A small boy saw me, stopped, bowed respectfully, but his eyes were full of caution. Fear prevents people from being natural, even when they are happy. We are trained to doubt our own joy. We think fear is something that can be overcome by courage. No, fear is not the opposite of courage. It is the opposite of understanding. Only when we comprehend the root cause of fear, that we are afraid because we want to become some image, does fear dissolve. Every education system is built on the idea of asterisk becoming asterisk. A child must asterisk become asterisk a good student, a youth must asterisk become a successful person, an elder must asterisk become asterisk a role model. But what about the true self? It is forgotten amidst the parade of titles. What the world calls education is, in reality, a series of operations designed to train obedience. Children are taught that if they don't conform, they will be excluded. And so, deep down, fear is considered necessary, like a rope tethering a bewildered animal to its cage. I told my students, when you do something purely out of fear, the intelligence within you dies little by little. You cannot be creative while trembling. They asked, "Are you afraid, teacher?" I smiled. We are all afraid, but we can observe fear without being consumed by it. When you observe fear like looking at a fire without judgment, without avoidance, you will see a spark of freedom within its flame. Fear hinders creativity because it makes people copy instead of explore. When we imitate, we become skillful but hollow. When we understand, we become serene yet vibrant. Another time, I told my students about a man who lived a life of complete obedience. He followed orders, observed every ritual, never erred until the end of his days. He said, "I never knew who I was." That is the quietest and most tragic death for humanity. Children are taught obedience sooner than they learn to ask questions. The moment we stop questioning, we stop living. True education must be an awakening, not a training. It must help people see themselves, their fears, their weaknesses, their curiosities, and from that, understand why they do what they do. This understanding doesn't require books. It requires silence, open eyes. I once sat watching a leaf fall and realized it fell neither out of fear nor out of clinging to life. It fell because that was its nature. When we can live like that leaf, not striving to become anyone else, we begin to understand what freedom is. And perhaps freedom is born only in a mind no longer dominated by fear. Fear creates a new need. People begin to seek support when their minds tremble. They want someone to show them the way. From this, authority is born. Someone stands up and says, "I know," and others immediately bow down. Thus, power arises not from strength, but from the weakness of the crowd. A student asked me, "Does a teacher need to give orders to students?" I replied, "When we give orders, we are admitting that we fear chaos. The teacher fears losing control, the students fear punishment. Parents fear their children going astray. Altogether, they build a web of power that no one dares to touch. Authority exists because people are afraid to live in ambiguity. We want a definitive answer, a clear template, a teaching to lean on. But once we follow, we lose our very capacity for inquiry. Obedience erodes intelligence, leaving behind only soulless cleverness. I once witnessed another teacher, so strict that every breath in the classroom was measured by discipline. Students sat upright, hands neatly placed, eyes fixed on the board, not allowed to ask useless questions. That classroom looked perfect, like an army, but in that absolute silence, intelligence was suffocated. No one dared to be curious, dared to make a mistake, dared to smile. People call discipline the foundation of order. But that is a subtle misconception. True order is not obedience, but an understanding of the chaos within oneself. If we don't understand why we do something, whether we obey or rebel, both are merely two sides of the same fear. Many asked me, "Should one live without rules?" I said, "The issue is not whether to have them or not, but how we look at them. If we look with fear, all rules become shackles. If we look with understanding, rules become a mirror to ourselves." One morning, I saw several students climbing a tree, laughing, then becoming scared when they saw me approach. I just looked at them and said nothing. A moment later, one came down and confessed, "I thought you would punish us." I said, "If you are afraid of punishment, you will never understand why you climbed. Curiosity, joy, the zest for life, these are the roots of learning. If we stifle them with discipline, we are creating souls that know how to obey, but not how to live." Authority is not just out there in politics, religion, or law. It is also hidden within each person. In the form of "I know what is right," people create ideals and then force themselves to live by those ideals. And so, a silent battle begins between who I am and who I should be. Discipline is set up to reconcile these two internal enemies within the same mind. But the result is only exhaustion. I once heard someone say, "I must become better." I asked, who is the one who must become better? And who is judging that you are not good enough? When we split ourselves into two parts, the doer and the observer, we create an inner dictator. That is the most subtle form of authority, the shadow of morality. When authority dominates, the mind is separated from life. We no longer see the flower, only the symbol of beauty, no longer hear children's laughter, only noise that needs correction. Everything is filtered through frameworks. And because of this, we lose the capacity for wonder. Only when not compelled does intelligence truly awaken. Freedom does not mean doing whatever one wants. It is the clear understanding of all inner impulses so that action no longer arises from fear or ambition. External discipline never creates inner order. True order is the silence of a mind that understands itself. And I realized that where there is true love, there is no need for authority. A teacher's love for students is not out of duty, but because he sees in the child his own nascent, awkward self, learning to see. That love is strong enough to teach without commanding, deep enough to correct without punishing. If the world were rebuilt on the foundation of love, not fear, perhaps we would no longer need any discipline. Because in love, every action naturally possesses order. That morning, I sat watching the sunlight fall through the classroom window, each dust mote suspended in the air as if listening. I told my students, "We call this learning, but are we truly learning?" The class was silent. I knew they held only one definition in their minds: learning is memorizing. But learning is not about cramming, it's the ability to see something old with new eyes. A person can read hundreds of books and still be foolish because he only adds to memory, not expands awareness. But a child, observing a raindrop fall without comparison or conclusion, is truly learning. When memory becomes the center of learning, the mind turns into a machine. It can calculate, reason, argue, but it cannot understand. Understanding doesn't come from accumulation, it comes from attention. Attention is when you are fully present in this moment, not pulled away by prejudice, expectation, or fear. I told them the story of a boy learning music. Every day he repeated the piece like a machine, but the more he practiced, the more lifeless the sound became. One day, he stopped, just sat listening to the wind through the window, and for the first time, he understood what music was. Music isn't in the notes, but in the silence between two notes. Just as learning isn't in the answer, but in the moment we pause to see what is truly happening. When memory takes over life, people begin to live in the past. We react, we don't reflect. We repeat old conclusions for new problems. Such a mind cannot create, it can only copy. And education has quietly become an assembly line producing identical copies, different in name but the same in thought. Then someone asked, "So, isn't knowledge necessary?" I said, "Knowledge is necessary, but only as a tool. If the tool becomes the master, we lose our freedom. Knowledge is a means, not an end." The danger is when we use knowledge to protect the ego, to prove ourselves right, to hide our fears. When we learn without understanding, people begin to seek security. They believe that if they have enough degrees, enough money, enough status, they will be safe. But there is no such thing as security in an insecure mind. We can possess the whole world, but just one word, one glance, and fear awakens. I once met a successful man, a grand house, luxury cars, respected by all, but at the slightest criticism, he would immediately burst into anger. I asked, "What are you protecting?" He replied, "My honor." And I said, "Honor doesn't need protection, only illusion does." Security is an illusion humans create to combat their own fear. We build walls, enact laws, place our trust, create systems, all just to keep a soul at peace that is already trembling. But life doesn't stand still. It changes, it flows, and every wall eventually crumbles. Many try to find stability in religion, in marriage, in their profession. They imagine these are sanctuaries, but that very fixity kills the flow of life. Only when we dare to step into uncertainty do we truly live. Like a boat that can only set sail when it dares to leave the shore. I asked the students, when you fear losing someone, do you truly love them? Or do you just love the feeling of security they provide? They were silent. Love and security cannot coexist. Where there is love, there is risk. Where there is risk, there is life. Once, I dreamed I was standing on a cliff. Below was the deep sea, strong winds, fierce waves. I felt afraid, but at the same time, something was captivating. I understood that freedom always comes with uncertainty. When we accept falling, that is when we begin to fly. We have been taught to seek security in groups, in nations, in beliefs, in customs. But a group is only secure when each individual within it is no longer afraid. If fear trembles within each person, then even with 1,000 flags, that society remains fragile. And perhaps the only security is to understand that there is no security at all. When we stop clinging, we have nothing left to lose. When we have nothing left to lose, we are free. I told my students, don't learn to asterisk have asterisk, learn to see asterisk, because when you see clearly, you no longer need to hold on. True seeing is the only source of security, for it belongs neither to the past nor the future. In the quiet afternoon, I looked at the young faces and wondered, do they have enough courage to live without clinging to a false sanctuary? And I knew that only when education becomes a journey of awareness, not achievement, would that answer be found. When fear and the desire for security dominate, ambition is the next thing born. People are afraid, so they seek support. And from that, they want more, to be better, smarter, more powerful, more respected. Ambition is the child born of fear and comparison. I once asked a student, what do you want to become? He immediately replied, I want to be successful. I asked, what does success mean? He was confused. It means being better than others. I was silent. The world is built on that very answer. And because of it, we lose our humanity. Ambition is the root of division. When we want more, we immediately place others in a lesser position, leading to envy, hostility, war. From schools to nations, every race begins with the same seed, the desire to surpass. But in that game, no one truly wins because each victory only paves the way for the fear of falling behind. I remember a very bright boy, always at the top of his class. Everyone praised him, his parents were proud, but in his eyes there was something strange, an unnamed tension. One day he came to me and said, I hate my best friend. He's starting to get almost as good grades as me. I looked at him and said, you don't hate your friend, you're just afraid of losing your position. Ambition is always hidden beneath the guise of effort. People think they are striving, but they are actually running from the fear of losing. Comparison is the source of suffering. When we cut ourselves off from life, we no longer see the beauty of who we are, but only what we lack compared to others. And when the whole world compares, everyone becomes a beggar seeking recognition. I once watched an artist paint his first picture. It was clumsy, proportions were off, colors smudged, but in his eyes there was the light of freedom. He said, I don't know how to paint, but I want to see the world with my hands. In that moment, I understood. When there is no longer comparison, every action becomes creation. But society doesn't accept that. Society needs competition to survive. It needs rankings, titles, accolades, awards for people to keep rushing forward without ever asking, what for? A world without comparison would render power meaningless, so people must maintain ambition as a collective dogma. I told my students a story about a mountaineer. He climbed his whole life. Reaching the peak, he found nothing but wind and clouds. At that moment, he realized he should have learned to admire the mountain from its base. Life is the same. While we strive to climb above others, we forget we are living under the sky. Ambition kills love. For where there is a desire for superiority, there is no room for understanding. Love sees others as part of oneself. Ambition sees them as steps to climb. And so, despite being filled with slogans of compassion, humanity is more solitary than ever. One day, I walked past a garden with a small, late-blooming flower hidden beneath the shade of a large tree. No one saw it, but it still radiated fragrance. I paused. That was an image of a life without ambition, quiet yet complete. It wasn't trying to be more beautiful than the flower next to it. It simply lived according to its nature. And in that humility, there was a beauty that all rankings were powerless against. When we understand this, we begin to see a paradox clearly. Wanting too much is the surest way to lose everything. Ambition makes us always look ahead, never touching the present. We live like thirsty people chasing mirages. Many think that giving up ambition is weakness, but in reality, only those who dare not to become are truly strong, because they are no longer pulled by praise or threat. They act from clarity, not from lack. I told my students, when you no longer compare, you will know what respect is. For only in a mind that doesn't measure can people see each other as equal presences, neither high nor low. In that world, each person is a self-illuminating lamp, not needing to shine brighter than anyone else. If we live without fear, without seeking security, without being pulled by ambition, what will we become? The answer isn't in words. It only unfolds in the moment we silently listen to our own heartbeat and realize that perhaps true freedom isn't about achieving, but about ceasing to become asterisk. One morning, I walked along the small path around the school. Wildflowers bloomed profusely on both sides, their gentle fragrance carried on the wind. A few students walked behind, giggling. Then one asked, "Teacher, what is love?" That question echoed in the air like a faint breeze. It was simple, yet perhaps the deepest question humanity has ever asked. We speak of love every day in songs, in prayers, in letters, and in tears. But is what we call love truly love? Or is it just fear disguised? I asked them back. When you say you love someone, what truly happens in your heart? A small child said, I want that person to always be with me. Another whispered, I'm afraid they will leave. I nodded. The love we know often arises from the fear of loneliness. And when we are afraid, we cling. We want to possess the other person, want them to belong to us, want them to think and feel as we do. But possession is not love. Possession is the beginning of conflict, where love turns into imprisonment. We say, you belong to me, as if bestowing a gift. But in reality, it's a bond. True love cannot exist in bondage. It's like a flame. If you close your hand around it, it extinguishes. A girl told me that her mother loved her very much but was always afraid she would make mistakes. Every time she stumbled, her mother scolded her out of excessive worry. I asked if that was love or fear. She fell silent. Fear disguises itself as love in millions of relationships. Parents, spouses, friends, people control each other in the name of love. They forbid, advise, interfere to feel important. But love doesn't need to be proven. Love only needs to be seen. I remember a man once told me, I love my wife so much I can't stand it when she talks to anyone else. I asked, so do you love her or do you love the feeling of possession? He was silent. When love turns into possession, it is no longer love but the fear of loss, and all fear gives rise to suffering. Someone asked, so what is true love? I replied, it cannot be defined, but you can feel it when the mind no longer demands. Love needs no reason to exist. It arises spontaneously, like rain falling on dry earth. It doesn't ask, what will I get? It simply touches and passes through. Many confuse love with empathy, compassion with attachment. They call pity love. But that is only arrogance veiled in velvet. They give because they want to appear noble. They endure because they fear losing face. They care because they need gratitude. Every action stemming from a motive is not love. True love does not measure, compare, or bargain. It doesn't ask if the other person is worthy, nor does it promise forever. It is like light. Wherever it shines, that place brightens, then darkens when there is no fuel, and its fuel is freedom. A student once said, but if you don't hold on, love might be lost. I said, when you hold on, that's precisely when you lose it. Love is not about holding, but about allowing what you love to be free. When you look at a flower and pick it, it dies. But if you leave it there, it continues to bloom. Love cannot coexist with fear, jealousy, or the desire for security. For all these things belong to the ego, and the ego only knows how to take, not how to give. Only when the mind is completely still, with no desires, no demands, does love spontaneously ignite. I told them the story of an old man who lived alone by the river. Every day he fed the birds, talked to the trees, smiled at the water. Someone asked him, aren't you lonely? He replied, I am only lonely when I need someone to fill my own emptiness. That statement silenced the entire class. Loneliness doesn't disappear when someone is nearby, it only disappears when we understand it. That was the moment I saw that true love is a state of understanding, not an emotion. When we understand ourselves, we see others without judgment. We no longer seek in them what we lack, because we lack nothing anymore. And in that silent space, love appears, light as a breath yet strong enough to dissolve all boundaries. Love is a smokeless fire. It needs no one to light it, no one to tend it. It burns because it is asterisk life itself. After the conversation about love, the class fell silent. A student softly asked, how can I truly know if I understand someone? I said, before understanding others, you must understand your own mind. We often think we know ourselves well, but in reality, we only know fragments of memory. We say, I am this way, I am that way, but these are merely echoes of the past. The mind is a continuous stream of images, reactions, desires, and fears. We live within it without ever seeing the whole. I asked, when you are sad, do you ever observe that sadness without trying to escape it? They shook their heads. People always want to fix their emotions. We feel sad, so we turn on music. We feel afraid, so we pray. We feel lonely, so we seek someone to talk to. But this very act of running away prevents us from ever understanding ourselves. I said, observe the mind as you observe the sky. Don't choose the beautiful clouds, don't chase away the dark ones, just observe. At that moment, a little girl asked, but who is observing? That question seemed to halt time. When we ask who is observing, we begin to touch the core of understanding. For if the observer is part of the observed, then that separation is an illusion. Observation without an observer, that is true seeing. When we look without labeling, without interpreting, the mind becomes silent. And in that silence, truth reveals itself. Understanding doesn't come from analysis, but from perception. I told them the story of a fake musician. He once played in a large orchestra, but in his old age, he simply sat by the window listening to the wind. When asked, he said, "I am listening to the music of silence." Listening is not about receiving sound, but about opening the inner space for sound to resonate on its own. We hear others speak, but we only hear through memory. When someone says something we disagree with, we immediately react. When something pleases us, we cling to it. We don't listen, we only compare. True listening is when the ego is no longer interfering. I told my students to listen to the birds singing. They closed their eyes. After a few minutes, I asked, "What do you hear?" One replied, "Birdsong, the rustling leaves, and even my own heartbeat." I smiled. When you listen with full attention, you will see that there are no separate sounds. All is a symphony. To listen with the heart is to see unity in separation. People often think understanding comes from reasoning. But true understanding arises only when the mind is completely still, just as a calm lake reflects the sky. A non-judgmental mind reflects truth. When we rush to understand, that very haste becomes a barrier. I remember a former student who was very intelligent. Every time he heard me speak, he would immediately argue. One day, I remained silent throughout the lesson, teaching nothing. At the end, he asked, "Why didn't you speak, teacher?" I replied, "Because you weren't listening." He blushed and became silent. Only when the mind ceases its resistance can one truly listen in life. To know how to listen is also to know how to love. To listen without judgment is the highest form of love. For when we listen without wanting to change the other person, we are accepting them completely as they are. Listening is not a skill but a state of being. It cannot be practiced, for practice only creates habits. Listening only comes with attention, and attention only comes with freedom. A mind that is compelled only hears its own noise. When we truly listen, time disappears. We are no longer "I am listening," but simply listening. In that moment, there is no teacher, no student, only a pure stream of awareness. That is the first door to freedom. And perhaps listening is the only way for the mind to understand itself, not through analysis or interpretation, but through complete presence in every breath, every movement of emotion. Understanding is not a conclusion but a realization. Right now, I told them, don't try to understand me, just listen. Because I know truth doesn't need to be grasped, it only needs to be heard. Another morning, I walked into the classroom without books. The students looked at each other, puzzled. I said, "Today we will not learn anything new." The whole class laughed, thinking it was a joke. I looked at them and asked, "But do you realize that the very desire to learn more makes you forget the most important thing, seeing what is?" We revere knowledge. We believe that the more we know, the more we understand. But this is rarely true, because knowledge is only cleverly arranged memory. It is the shadow of what is past, not the light of what is alive. When the mind is filled with what it knows, there is no room for discovery. I told the story of a man who knew everything about love. He had read hundreds of books, quoted every philosopher. But when his wife left, he collapsed, because all he knew could not save the emptiness within. Knowledge cannot replace true understanding. Understanding is not in books. It is in how we look at life every day. Many learn to be intelligent, but that intelligence is merely technique. They can analyze, argue well, use words skillfully, but they do not know how to love, how to listen, how to be silent. A mind full of facts but lacking awareness is dry ground. It can plant trees of logic but cannot sprout life. I looked around the classroom, seeing a few faces looking up, a few pairs of eyes still fixed on their notebooks. I said softly, "When you write down every word, you might miss what is happening. Understanding is not copying, but seeing clearly in that moment something that touches you. If you only copy, you might preserve the words but lose their soul." A boy once asked me, "So, how should I learn?" I said, "Learn as if you know nothing at all. Only in a state of not knowing does the mind open. Just as a clenched hand cannot receive anything more, a mind full of opinions cannot understand anything new." Many are proud of their vast knowledge, but that very pride is a wall. They immediately deny anything that goes against their views. They live by fixed conclusions, and in that closed world there is no room for life. True understanding never stops. It is a flowing river, not a stationary wall. I remember a conversation with an old friend, a very erudite professor. We sat under a tree. I asked, "When you say, 'I know,' does that mean you stop searching?" He gave a forced smile. When we say, "I know," we have died to what we know, because life is always new while knowledge is old. In class, I looked at the young faces and realized a truth. They are taught how to answer, but no one teaches them how to see. Knowledge is accumulated, but wisdom must be discovered. Wisdom is not a result, but the energy of attention. Then I told the story of a girl who studied philosophy. She memorized every definition of compassion, but still couldn't connect with anyone. She asked me, "I read so much, but why don't I understand?" I said, "Because you are trying to asterisk no instead of asterisk see asterisk. You read to add ideas, not to empty your mind." She cried. I understood. In those tears, she learned her first lesson. Truth doesn't need someone to preserve it, it only needs someone to feel it. Knowledge can help us build airplanes, conquer the moon, but it cannot bring us peace when someone leaves. It can decode the structure of an atom, but not a single tear. The greatest things in life are not found in language. Therefore, I told my students, don't try to memorize. Let understanding come to you. Understanding is not the result of effort, but the stillness when the mind is no longer in conflict. Only in silence does true understanding emerge. And then I realized that true affection also arises only in that silence. When we no longer try to love someone, love appears naturally. Love that is learned, that is preached, is merely a copy of something dead. But true love, it is soft as water, yet strong enough to smooth every rough edge of the soul. I looked at them, speaking slowly. You can remember every word I say, but if you don't feel it, you will forget everything. But if you truly see something in your heart, you will never forget, even without trying to remember. Understanding is living, not storing words. In the afternoon, as the sun began to set over the schoolyard, I saw two students arguing by a tree. One was crying, the other threw their satchel to the ground. I approached. The crying child said, "Teacher, he was praised, but I wasn't. I'm good at studying too, why does the teacher only care for him?" That seemingly small statement contained the root of human suffering, jealousy, a silent seed that destroys all love. I asked, "Have you ever asked yourself why you are sad not because you were punished, but because someone else was praised?" The child was silent. Jealousy is not just wanting what others have, but constantly comparing oneself. We measure our self-worth by the eyes of others. We want more, want to be seen, want to be recognized. And when that doesn't happen, we feel ourselves shrink. Comparison is the beginning of suffering. From a young age, we are taught to be better, smarter, more successful. We are raised with rankings with words like, "You must try harder." And so, everyone grows up carrying an invisible ruler to measure themselves and everyone else. I looked at the child, then at the distant row of trees. The wind swayed their leaves, each trembling in its own way. "Do you see?" I said. "No leaf tries to be like another leaf. They tremble because of the wind, not out of rivalry. We have forgotten to live like those leaves, simply existing in our own way without comparison." Jealousy is more subtle than we think. It hides in friendship, in love, in even morality. People are jealous of others' happiness, their beauty, their intelligence, even their peace. Jealousy is the shadow of desire. Where there is desire, there is comparison. A girl once told me, "I am jealous because I love." I said, "When you are jealous, you no longer love, you only want to possess." Love and jealousy cannot coexist, because jealousy is the voice of the wounded ego, while love is the space where the ego is silent. People think that competition drives progress, but in reality, it only creates tension and fear. A society built on competition will never know peace. When we try to surpass others, we inadvertently weaken ourselves because our energy is drained by comparison. I remember a former student who painted beautifully, but every time someone praised another friend, she would withdraw for a day. I asked, "Why do you paint?" She replied, "To be recognized." I said, "Then you are no longer painting. You are selling your soul for the eyes of others." When we do something to prove ourselves, creativity dies. Jealousy makes people lose the ability to love, because when we compare, we only see others as mirrors reflecting our own lack. We no longer see them as human beings, but as a yardstick for our insecurity. And in that world, there is no love, only fear called by another name. I told the class, look directly at your feeling of jealousy. Don't run from it. If you observe it as you would a flame without judgment, without trying to extinguish it, you will see something strange happen. Jealousy dissolves in that very gaze. It exists only when we name it, cling to it, analyze it. When we simply observe without doing anything, it dissipates on its own. Someone asked me, "So how can I not be jealous?" I said, "Don't try not to be jealous, just understand yourself when you asterisk are jealous." Understanding doesn't come from resistance, but from perception. When we understand, jealousy has no ground to stand on because it only exists in a mind that is comparing. One day, I walked along the riverbank. There were two flowers growing close together, one large, one small. The wind blew. Both swayed, neither looking at the other to ask, "Am I as beautiful?" Nature knows no jealousy. Only humans compare themselves to the images they create. And I understood that only when comparison ceases does one begin to know what freedom is. Freedom is not about surpassing anyone, but about no longer needing to surpass. In the silence of a mind that does not measure, we encounter a completely different kind of love, without object, without conditions, without reason. I looked at my students and said slowly, "The miracle is that when you no longer want to be like anyone else, you begin to shine in your own unique way. That light is not dazzling, not attention-seeking, but warm and real, for it is not created to be seen, but to illuminate, the seed of non-comparison." And from that, something humanity has always sought can grow, peace within one's own heart. One morning, the sky was covered in a light mist. The classroom was silent. I asked, "When you hear someone say something truly profound, something that touches your heart deeply, what happens?" A few eyes were puzzled. I continued, "Do you immediately see the truth, or do you start thinking about it, analyzing, arguing, memorizing?" Many believe understanding is the result of reasoning, but true understanding is the moment of instant seeing, unhindered by the barriers of words or memories. When you see fire, you don't need anyone to tell you it's hot, you just know. This living understanding cannot be cultivated over time. It happens right now or never. A student asked, "So, can I train myself to understand?" I smiled. If you have to train to understand, then it is no longer understanding. Understanding is not a skill, but the awakening of intelligence when there is no resistance. Understanding is seeing clearly, not trying to see clearly. We often accumulate experiences, thinking that the more experiences we have, the wiser we become. But memory doesn't generate creativity, it only repeats the old. Memory is the past, it is dead. When the past dominates the present, we live by shadows, not by light. I told my students about an old painter who painted for 40 years. And one day he burned all his paintings. Everyone was shocked. He said, "I painted out of habit, I no longer saw with true eyes. Memory creates skill, but skill kills new perception." A little girl asked, "So, should we forget everything we've learned?" I replied, "Not forget, but don't let what you've learned become a wall. When you see the world through what you already know, you no longer see what is asterisk. Only in an empty mind does the true appear." I remember once standing and looking at a beggar on the street. He held out his hand, and I immediately thought, "Pity, how unfortunate." But in that very moment, I realized I wasn't truly seeing him. I was only seeing him through a concept. If you want to understand a human being, don't look through opinions, look with silence. Then another student asked, "So what is the role of words? We need words to communicate." I said, "True, words are necessary, but only if you know that words are not the truth. Words are just a map. If you follow the map for too long, you forget the real path. We say love, freedom, truth. But these words are not love, freedom, or truth themselves. They are just echoes. And when the mind clings to echoes, it forgets the song." I told the story of a monk who spent his life reading scriptures about peace, but when he heard something he disagreed with, he immediately became angry. He knew the word peace, but had never touched the quiet within his heart. Words can obscure reality like clouds obscuring the sun. The more people talk about love, the further they often are from love because words have replaced living. I said, "Try listening to the birds outside." The class fell silent. "Now name that sound." A student whispered, "It's a sparrow." "Exactly," I said, "but when you say sparrow, you stop listening. You only hear the name, no longer the sound." Words are the boundary of attention. When we assign a name, we kill the life in what is present. People asked me, "Is there a way to escape the habit of clinging to words?" I said, "Just see it without judgment. If you know you are being led by words, those words lose their power. To see is freedom." And I realized that true understanding only arises when words are silent and the mind stops seeking meaning. When that happens, there is a strange moment. Everything becomes clear without needing a name. As evening fell, sunlight touched the students' faces. I said, "When you see something truly real, don't turn it into a slogan. Live with it because understanding cannot be stored in the drawer of memory. It is a living, breathing entity, changing every second." Before class ended, I whispered, "As long as you rely on memory to live, you are not truly living. As long as you cling to words to understand, you are not truly understanding. Look, listen, be silent, and then you will know without needing to name it." The next morning, the sky was clear after the night rain. The air carried the scent of wet earth and young grass. I sat with a few students under an old tree. Birds chirped around the branches still wet with dew. A boy asked, "How can my mind find peace, teacher?" I try to meditate, I try to forget my worries, but the harder I try, the more confused I become. I looked at him and said, "You cannot find peace by seeking it." His eyes widened. I smiled. Peace is not the result of effort, but the consequence of understanding. When you try to be peaceful, that very effort disturbs your mind. We think we can achieve peace by controlling our thoughts, avoiding noise, or clinging to a belief. But the one trying to be peaceful is the very root of unrest. The mind cannot find what it is the cause of losing. Only when the seeker disappears does peace exist. I said, "Look at the water after the rain. It doesn't try to reflect the sky. It simply remains still, and because of that, everything is naturally reflected. A peaceful mind is not peaceful because it wants asterisk to be, but because it no longer resists." A little girl asked, "So what about when I suffer? What should I do to stop suffering?" I said, "Do nothing at all. Look at that suffering as you look at a dewdrop on a leaf, bright yet fragile. When you don't want to escape it, you begin to understand it, and in that understanding, suffering dissolves. Peace is not running away from conflict, but clearly understanding conflict. When you are no longer afraid of what you feel, the mind naturally becomes still." A moment later, the wind picked up, leaves fluttering down. I asked the group, "Do you see the beauty of this morning?" A few nodded. "Beauty," I said, "is not in the scenery, but in a gaze free of comparison. Only when the mind is at peace do we see beauty, and when we see beauty, the mind finds peace. These two are one." I told the story of a man who pursued fame his entire life. When he grew old, he came to me and said, "I succeeded, but I cannot find peace." I asked, "Have you ever watched the clouds without thinking about who you are?" He shook his head. When the mind always projects the light of the ego, it can never see the beauty of the world. Someone asked me, "What is the meaning of life?" I said, "Why are you looking for it?" The person smiled, "Because I don't know, that's why I'm looking." I replied, "And precisely because you seek, you do not see. Meaning is not found far away, it lies in how you are living. We want to know purpose, so we divide life into fragments: work, religion, love, leisure. Then we ask, which fragment is the true meaning? But life has no fragments. It is a complete flow. Only when you see the whole will you see its truth." A student asked, "So, does life have a purpose?" I said, "When you ask that, you have separated life from the very act of living. Life needs no purpose because the very act of living, of knowing love, is already the purpose." I told them about a boy who loved to draw. Adults asked, "Do you want to become a famous artist someday?" He replied, "No, I just want to draw." In that answer was all the meaning of life. Meaning is not born from results, but from completeness in every moment. At noon, the sun shone through the leaves, casting sparkling light spots on the ground. I said softly, "Many people live without ever truly seeing. They just go, just do, just think. They live for tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. True life exists only in the present. When you look at a flower and think it will wilt tomorrow, you have lost the moment it is blooming. When you think about happiness, you are no longer happy. Thinking about living is not living." A student thoughtfully asked, "If everything is impermanent, then what is the point of living?" I said, "To see that impermanence is also beauty. Everything changes so that we do not fall asleep in the old. If a flower bloomed forever, you would no longer see its beauty." And I understood that peace and meaning are not two paths, but one. When a person's mind is peaceful, they find meaning in every breath. But when you seek meaning through intellect, peace abandons you. Peace is not in monasteries, not in scriptures, nor in my words. It is right there in the moment you no longer want to hold on to anything. Peace is when you stop trying to asterisk become and simply are asterisk. After the conversation about peace, someone asked me, "So how does one live intelligently?" I was silent for a moment, then said, "Intelligence is not knowing a lot, but the ability to see the truth as it reveals itself. Many believe that wisdom is the result of knowledge. They read countless books, attend innumerable lectures, memorize the wise words of others. But true wisdom is not in words, but in awakened awareness. It does not accumulate over years, but shines forth in every moment of perception." A student asked, "Teacher, do intelligent people ever make mistakes?" I said, "Yes, they do. But they see the mistake as soon as it arises, so there is no need for regret. Intelligence is the ability to see the motive of an action before it becomes a consequence. An ignorant person is not someone who is uneducated, but someone who acts without knowing why they are acting." I told the story of a talented engineer who had everything the world called success, but when he met his child, he only knew how to give orders. When arguing, he always wanted to win. He understood machines, but not the heart. And that is the tragedy of an education that only teaches how to operate the world, but not how to understand oneself. True education is not training for a living, but an opening to live fully. It is not about creating minds full of facts, but sensitive souls that know compassion, how to listen. If one only knows how to work efficiently but not how to love, humanity will turn the world into a factory. One day, I told the students, nowadays, students are judged by their grades, teachers by their positions, and schools by their reputation. But in all these numbers, who measures compassion, curiosity, or kindness? When what cannot be measured is forgotten, education becomes a tool of society, no longer a path for the soul. I asked a small child, "Why do you study?" He replied, "To be a useful person." "What does it mean to be useful?" I asked further. He was silent. Adults have instilled slogans into children's heads that they themselves don't understand. They want their children to succeed but fear them asking questions. They teach their children to speak truthfully but live by compromise. This contradiction in adults is the illness of education. Someone objected, "But society needs rules, it needs frameworks." I said, "True, but frameworks are only valuable when people have inner understanding. Otherwise, they only create obedient individuals who don't know why. True wisdom is born from freedom, not from obedience." I once witnessed a boy being scolded for daring to ask why we had to salute the flag. The teacher became angry, considering it disrespectful. But that very question was a sign of intelligence. When you stop asking questions, intelligence dies. In another lesson, I said, the teacher and the student should not stand on two separate shores. The class looked at me confused. I explained, the teacher is not a full pitcher pouring water into an empty one. The teacher is simply one who observes alongside the student. When we look together, there is no one teaching, no one learning, there is only seeing. Understanding cannot be transmitted, it can only be discovered together. A student said, "But you still teach us, teacher." I smiled, "We are only conversing. If you listen out of fear, that is rote learning. If you listen out of curiosity, that is learning to live." Education begins when the student is no longer afraid of criticism, afraid of losing, afraid of not meeting standards. Those very fears kill creativity. A child afraid of making mistakes will never discover anything new. I looked out the window and saw a few children playing tag, laughing loudly. I told the class, that is the image of learning, curiosity, freedom, joy. But as we grow up, we replace laughter with worry, questions with conclusions. And so we mature in knowledge but become aged in spirit. True wisdom, I said, is the harmony between understanding and love. When you understand without love, you become cold. When you love without understanding, you are easily blind. Only when these two coexist will your actions possess the quality of true wisdom. In the afternoon, sunlight streamed through the window. I spoke my final words, "Don't learn to win and don't learn to lose. Learn to see clearly. For when you see clearly, you don't need anyone to tell you how to live." And I knew that in that moment, some eyes had brightened with the light of wisdom, not just a perfect score. On the last morning, before the students left the school, the atmosphere seemed to slow down. Leaves gently fell, distant birdsong echoed. A little girl asked me, "Teacher, out there people talk about religion, about belief, about God. I don't really understand. What is * religion?" I smiled. Religion, as you know it, often means temples, rituals, prayers, scriptures, and rules. But true religion is not found in those. True religion is a continuous process of learning to see the truth, not just to believe what others say is true. Many believe that faith is the foundation of morality. They want a safe system to lean on. But belief only stops people from inquiring. When you say, "I know what God is," you have stopped searching. Truth is never found in what is already known. I told them the story of a pilgrim who traveled everywhere seeking God. Finally, he came to a very ancient temple, knelt, and wept. A child standing nearby said, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I am looking for God." The child smiled. If he were here, he wouldn't need lamps and smoke to appear. The man was startled. Truth needs no adornment, for it is always there in the simplest gaze. I continued, religion does not begin with belief, but with doubt. People can only discover truth when they dare to question, dare to not accept, dare to stand alone. A person with faith without understanding is merely sleeping in another's dream. A boy asked, "So if we don't believe in anything at all, will life become empty?" I replied, "On the contrary, when you are not bound by beliefs, your mind opens to everything. You begin to listen, observe, love without fear. And it is in that very state that you touch the sacred. True religion is freedom from all images of God. When you no longer seek him in temples, he appears in a leaf in the eyes of a passerby in your own breath. A student asked, "Teacher, is there a way to know what is true?" I said, "There is only one way, to see without words, without memory, without anyone else. Truth cannot be taught. It can only be discovered in the silence of the mind. We call it knowing when we immediately assign a name, but truth is not in words, nor in reasoning. It only appears when all thought ceases, when the mind is completely still. What is reveals itself." That afternoon, I walked around the schoolyard. A few students were tidying up, laughter mixed with the sound of the wind. A boy ran up to me, "Teacher, I'm scared to go out into the world. Here I feel peaceful, but out there must be so many scary things." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "When you carry this attention with you, you have nothing to fear. Where there is attention, there is freedom." I said, "Don't seek peace in others or in work. Peace lies in how you look at everything. What if you forget this? Then," I said, "start again by listening once more. Living is a never-ending process of learning. There is no end. True religion is lifelong learning, not learning dogma, but learning to see yourself in every movement of life." Another student asked, "So, are you happy, teacher?" I smiled. "I don't seek happiness, but it is always here when I am not busy looking for it." Happiness is the shadow of freedom. It comes when the mind no longer wants to achieve anything. When the farewell ceremony concluded, I stood at the gate, looking at their bright yet sometimes confused faces. I said, "As you leave this place, remember not to carry what I have said as doctrine. Let it live in how you see, how you listen, how you love. Don't believe me, see for yourselves." I paused for a moment, then added softly, "Out there are crowded paths and empty paths. Go anywhere you wish, as long as you go with awareness. Truth is not at the end of the path, but in every step you take. If you walk with an awakened mind, every step is an encounter with the divine." The afternoon sun stretched across the ground, light reflecting on the remaining dewdrops from the morning. I looked around and found everything strangely still. When a person no longer wants to become anything, when the mind ceases to resist, when the heart is no longer afraid to love, that is religion. I turned away, knowing that from here, each person would walk in a different direction, but the true path is not out there. It is within, where each person seeks, gets lost, and then finds themselves again. And in that silence, I understood that life is not something to be understood, but something to be lived.